I've spent my life studying. I've spent my life meditating. I've done enough psychedelics to, at least a battalion. I've tried to see things like what the hell is really going on here. I went on a vision quest, and it was about an 18-month quest of sitting on the earth. And I would sit, and I sat until I saw myself as integral to the very story I was inside of. Now that sounds ridiculous, maybe paradoxical, but what I want you to see is that the earth herself is speaking. The whole metaphysic that I've laid out with my cohorts and tried to just dance around and make it part of the celebration of life has to do with this best guess. This place where the earth and ourselves are so connected that we are actually in conversation with each other. So today we're going to talk about the earth speaks. And she does speak. She taught us how to build our huts. She taught us how to hunt. She taught us how to grow things. She continues to teach us. If you look at the CRISPR research and how fast we're getting our vaccines, it's because we've learned to look inside bacteria and see and learn and listen to how they do things and then replicate them. The whole concept of the Gaia Hypothesis, which is that the earth is a self-regulating complex system that maintains conditions for life. And when those conditions for life are threatened, she speaks to us. When we don't listen, when we get caught up in our own house of mirrors, and that's what culture is, that's what nation state is, that's what all these things are that are less than organic. They are self-imposed differences instead of seeing us as one. But the less we listen, the more she will raise her voice. And she's raising her voice quite clearly now. And I want to say this is my belief, but it's not a belief as much as a conclusion. When you look at the science, when you look at our ability to hear and to see what is true and real, the increase of floods and fire and tornadoes and hurricanes, the climate change issues, the virus is the earth trying to teach us that all our boundaries, our geopolitical boundaries, are provisional at very best. You see, the nation states need to begin to think as one. And the one is who we are really. In my mind, when I pray, I don't think of God anymore. I think of this oneness of being, this wholeness that is. We've talked about the word tzedakah. Remember that? Where everything fits. You get a motor or an engine and it's just at its peak performance. When you get a human body, watch the Olympics, you're going to see a lot of human beings have put their health in an extremely tzedakah situation. Everything is there. As a native woman once told me, the whole purpose of this whole place we are is the great touching. And the great touching has to do with putting ourselves in relationship to the wholeness of being in life, and to be in a conversation and dialogue with that wholeness so that, one, we have a direction where health is, and we can say this is healthy and this is not. And two, we can create ever-expanding narratives of how to talk about the oneness of being and our individuality within that interconnected oneness of being. But listening, to truly listen, to sit, till we are an integral part of the very story that we're inside of, to see it all as one thing, and that life is not my individual life, but there's one life. This is the original meaning of communion in the bread and the wine. Every single breath. Now remember, the word breath in Latin is spiritus. So every time you take a breath, you're doing a spiritual event. You are partaking of the oneness of life. But you can't just live on air. You have to eat. You have to drink. And that is the wine. You see how it's connected? You see how these rituals are trying to connect us? And of course we screw the rituals up. I'm convinced of that. We dogmatize them into very narrow bandwidths of meaning, and we miss the greater peace. Every breath is a spiritual event. Every breath is a communion. Every meal, every drink of water is a communion. Calm means share. Calm union, the oneness. Share the oneness, communion. So today, that's where we're going. We're going to the place. Is the earth speaking? Well, I'm convinced that she is speaking, and I try to listen every single day. So the earth speaks. I'm just going to throw it open as a big old opening comment, and I'll turn it over to you first, Bob.
Well, like any form of language, it's easy to misinterpret it. It's easy to not understand it at all. So when we talk about the earth speaking, I think the key is that we have to try and understand what is being communicated. And I think that you've hit on a number of important points, like with the virus and with the climate change and so forth. And the other people who are also the earth that are speaking and are communicating with us, we have to learn to discern what is the truth in those communications. And a lot of it involves getting ourselves out of the way, getting our preconceptions, getting our biases, getting our individual desires out of the way so that we can hear what is being communicated. And that's kind of the whole Zen search, if you will, for being authentic in the moment is getting rid of all of those preconceptions, just taking the communication as it is at that moment.
Yeah. Regrettably, many of those preconceptions are what people define root their very life in terms of their life definitions. And
Indeed.
And then
Indeed.
we get into that
Yes.
hang up. So, Mary Ann, the earth speaking, how see it in your mind?
Oh, the first thing I think about is everything that you guys have both talked about, and the word that pops into my mind is the earth is speaking in what language. And so when we start to think about language, we have to start thinking about what you were saying, Bob. How do we understand it? And is there any way that we can talk about it when the earth is speaking in symbolic terms in many ways, not in any specific language, but and so how do we interpret that? How do we have an ongoing dialogue? And one of my favorite quotes that came from a very dear friend of mine is that Mother Earth will always have the final word. And when you start to think about what's happening in the world and what's happening on the planet, that we can be expelled, but the earth will still survive. And I think that, how do we remain in dialogue with the earth? So what do we do? Do we clean up our rivers? Do we clean up our ground? There's all of the groundwater that's been contaminated. How do we get that dialogue going so that we're taking care of the earth the same way the earth is taking care of us?
And, I think each of the sciences are deciphering one of the languages. Geologists, I love taking walks with geologists because the earth is speaking right there. And you say, oh, this is some kind of rock, and it means this. And the prehistoric river was here.
Exactly.
Yeah. Every science is trying to decipher it, and they're all coming together into a greater complex meaning. The Gaia Hypothesis, to me, is a great overarching model or paradigm for understanding how the earth regulates herself and how we can participate in that. There's a few things. What we're learning is the language of life herself. What is this language and how do we do it? I think also the imperative to listen is greater today than any time in modern history, for the simple reason it's existential. We've hit an upper limit, a point of diminishing returns, if you will. So it comes down to, in terms of the human family, in my mind, because it always gets back to fear and wanting to be secure, is resources, food, communications, energy, the housing. These are basic things that human beings need. We have been fighting over resources since the beginning, whether it was hunting ground, whether it was, agricultural place, cotton fields or whatever. We've been fighting over resources. We now know that there are a limited number of resources, and that those resources can be used in such a way to, one, improve their economic and environmental aspects, and two, to be more greatly shared. And this is part of what the Earth is trying to talk about. You know, the Earth doesn't divvy up the atmosphere saying this part of the planet gets it and this part doesn't. It's everywhere. So how do we learn to listen? And I guess it gets back to stories. What are the stories? And I think Avatar was a great story, because in the end, the whole planet rose up to defend itself against what was attacking it. How do we tweak the planet in such a way, because she's infinitely variable, that we might hear her more clearly? Does that make sense as a question?
Well, yeah, it does. And again, we have to realize that when we say the Earth is speaking, there are a lot of messages happening all the time, probably an infinite number if we could really parse them all out. But we have to be able to not only listen to them, hear them, understand their implications, but then take action. When in the early 1970s, a substantial number of scientists said that the Earth was warming, and that if we didn't do something about it, we were going to see terrible storms, we were going to see droughts, we were going to see fires, we were going to see all the things that are happening today. And although some people listened to that, most people did not. Most people thought, well, that's just a lot of, the chicken saying the sky is falling, that old myth. Well, now we're to the point where maybe we have enough people who are listening to the planet and observing the effects, and those effects are really one way that the planet is communicating with us. Maybe there are enough people that we will be able to take some action. I don't know. We've talked about how it's always a numbers game. There has to be enough people who are willing to move in a certain direction to go beyond that tipping point. And we're right on the edge now. It can go either way. And it's up to us as individuals to listen to the planet that's speaking through scientists, that's speaking through weather patterns, that's speaking through all of these different ways.
And it's not a linear language, is what you're saying. It's a language that's happening in all directions at once.
Right.
And we don't have the stories and the narratives to reflect that all the time. I think of one of the ones that brought me into that, Bob, was the eagles were dying. And it turns out we were using fertilizer that was running off into the lakes and the rivers. The fish were eating it. The eagles were eating the fish, and the eagle's eggshell was getting thinner and thinner so it wouldn't sustain the baby eagle. We quit putting the stuff into the river and the lakes. And of course, what's happened to the eagle population? Well, man, I'll tell you what, once a year you can go out to Coeur d'Alene and see like 30, 40 of them all fishing at once. It's those stories that we need to keep telling so that we can show people the not just complexity, but the interconnectedness of it all, and for people to see themselves as part of that.
Yes.
Yeah,
but then
Go ahead, Mary
go
Ann.
ahead, Mary Ann.
well, I was just going to say yes, and to me, the earth is speaking very loud and clear, and yet there are a lot of people that still are not listening and refuse to listen and don't want to listen. And so when we have this shared resource, the whole planet, what do you do when those in power are not listening and not taking appropriate actions? You know, your example of the eagles, that's a beautiful example of, yeah, we've noticed this is happening. We're seeing it happening. Let's find out why it's happening, and let's do some course correction. And that's what we're not seeing in a lot of areas right now is, yes, we see these things happening, but we're not agreed upon why they're happening, and we're not agreed upon a course correction. And so I think that whole idea of finding this common language, this common goal, this way of being able to address these things that really seeks to fix them. And I think we have that. There are a lot of smart people doing a lot of smart things and working on some of these big problems out there, but we're not hearing about them in the mainstream. We're not seeing that come up into the fullness that they can be. And but I think you're right. We're at a tipping point. Some people would say we've gone beyond it. But I still want to be hopeful, right? That
it's time to take action. What we have to do, any leader that denies climate change, that is against moving toward a more sustainable economy, anybody that's against that should be voted out of office. And again, it's a numbers game. We've got to get enough people to vote against the climate change deniers, to vote against the people who would rather make money in the short term rather than take care of the planet in the long term. They have to be voted out of office. We have to take the power away from them.
And now we're getting into politics, and here's the thing. How do we do that? Because the fact is, this narrow bandwidth of dogma is getting more entrenched. And again, we've talked about reaction formation, and we can talk about all the things that get in the way, but I really want us to focus on what it is we're hearing. We don't have a whole lot of time. I mean, a half hour. Come on, man. This is a thesis here or a dissertation.
Well, I think that those of us who are listening and who see, who are understanding at least a piece of it, I think that we're there. We don't need to listen any harder. We've gotten the message. It's how do we get that message to other people? And if they're not going to listen, we have to take them out of the loop.
I mean, see, here's the thing. I think the earth is trying to teach us how to talk to each other. I think part of what the virus is doing, you can't take these people out of the loop, but you can make the consequences of them not recognizing the thing more. And I think the earth.
I'm down.
I'm just saying. I think the earth. I think the earth is doing that right now. I think, as somebody said on Facebook, everybody's going to get this virus, and I said, well, if that's the case, then it's going to morph like hell into lesser and greater killer degrees. I think that the virus is the earth talking to us, saying life knows no boundaries.
I agree. But here I am down in Florida, and I've got a governor who refuses to take actions to stop the virus. And as long as he's in power, then Florida is going to have the highest rate of infections. He's now saying, "Oh, we're testing too much." It is so ridiculous. And
so what do you do?
Yeah,
I mean,
you
you have to. Then you have to say,
office.
"What am I
You
doing
got to
to
vote him out?"
Yeah, and what are you doing to do that? Are you campaigning? Are you stuffing envelopes? Are you?
Well, there's a lot of things that a lot of people can do.
That's exactly right. And everybody
is
should be
casting your
doing
vote.
Everybody should be
vote
doing
for the right people.
When you said the viruses or the earth is teaching us how to speak to each other, it's teaching us how to scream and yell at each other.
We've been doing that forever.
I know, but I think it's getting a little bit. All of the manners have gone, right.
But Marianne, we're approaching the norm. Okay, in terms of human history, we're moving closer to the norm in human history. We have lived our lives in a precious bubble that was an anomaly of human history. And I think that's important to recognize that. So
I do recognize that. And I think what the fundamental question now is, when you talk about how are we speaking to, what is the earth trying to tell us? I think the question the earth is asking is, what does it mean to be a human being on this planet? And what does it mean to care about your longevity? What does it mean to care about the connectedness in all of us and moving forward? And so I think that is the fundamental thing that I'm hearing is, what does it mean to be a human being? Is it that we are these horrible creatures that just are at each other's throat? Or does it mean that we have some kind of a better purpose, a better reason to be here, and a higher nature? And how is that connected to the earth?
Well, I think both are true. And that's, again, it gets back to the numbers game.
But who wins?
Well, we don't know yet.
Yeah. But I think, the other piece of this too is there's a long-term view and a short-term view. And I think that we're realizing, and more people are realizing, if we don't start taking that long-term view, we are going to annihilate ourselves.
Yeah.
And the short-term view helps me and mine. The long-term view helps everyone and everything.
And I mean, I think that's part of what the earth is trying to get us to see, that it took 14 billion years for the universe to get us here. And that the process is laborious and it takes a lot of time. And if you screw it up, you can't just fix it overnight. And so I want to bring us to the metaphysic piece of this, because I'm trying to think of things mythically. And if you think of what the earth is, the blue planet, the earth is where life is growing consciousness. Everything we've talked about is the struggle of consciousness to more appropriately put ourselves in accord with life itself, with the wholeness of life, with the whole complexity of life. Every spiritual teaching talks about this. Every people has come up with the golden rule for one reason and one reason only. The earth has said, you guys cannot think as separate realities. Everything's so interconnected, you can't do that. And I said, guys, that was my own sexist stuff. But you people, you folks, it's one big superordinate happening, and you're part of it. You're not above it. You can use it to put yourself in a certain relationship that is in discord, but you can't ever put yourself above it or outside it. It's who you are and how you've percolated. And this is the piece I want to get. The earth is growing life into consciousness. All the stuff we've talked about is the struggle of consciousness to put ourselves in accord. And here we are in a way that is trying to create assurances and security so that everybody feels secure enough to not want to see someone else as the enemy. that they're going to get their food, they're going to get clothing, they're going to get good TV reception, whatever, that we all have a piece of the pie.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah. But, let me get back to what Marianne was saying about long-term view and short-term view.
Yeah.
And it's been a whole episode, and I haven't thrown out my favorite word, which is balance. We have to have both, because if we wait for the long-term view to happen, the short-term view is going to kill us all. So we have to take some short-term actions to ensure this security that we all know is so important. But those actions have to be taken in the context of a long-term view. So again, we have to find in our own path how we can best communicate to the people we encounter, how we can take the actions that are most beneficial to moving toward this unity of the planet, and do that. But it's never either or.
No, and I think you're right. It's both and I think that's right. It's an oscillation event. And believe it or not, we're coming to the end of our half hour. I'm just thankful we haven't had a lot of technical glitches, because we're running on household routers here. So, Marianne, final comments on The Earth Speaks?
Well, I think, I just want to maybe close with what Bob was just talking about taking action. And yeah, we have to take action in the short term. We have to decide on something, but those actions have to be with a long-term goal. And so I think that everything that we do right now is crucial to what's going to result from this tomorrow, right? We know that our actions will affect the future. And I think taking that responsibility, that we're all responsible for this. And I know I kind of harp on that a lot, but it's our individual choices that we make every single day, big and small, that are going to change the way the world looks tomorrow.
Amen. And as you were talking, I kept thinking Yoko Ono's, think globally, act locally, that, both of those are integral. Thanks for that, Marianne. Hey, Bob, final comments.
Well, I think I've pretty much said everything I want to say today. It just, we have to be willing to listen and think about the implications of what both our actions and other people's actions are doing. And I hate to get back to politics, but, we hear so many people say, well, 2024 or 2022 is going to be an off year. So the Democrats are going to lose control of Congress. It's inevitable. Well, if it's inevitable that every 2 years the control shifts back and forth between these two opposing parties who can't seem to agree on anything, we have to break that. We have to find which candidate is going to be the closest to what we think should be happening, and make sure they get put into power. Because if we let the people who are the deniers continue to control things, then we won't have a long-term strategy.
And we'll cut ourselves off from the very thing we need to listen to most, which is the Earth speaking. And that's a great segue, Bob. Because, ever since Da Vinci, at least in my readings, and I'm sure it goes back further than that, we've been trying to put the human being in proper proportion to nature, to the wholeness of it. And this keeps bringing us into higher orders of understanding, in terms of what is a star that's in the sky. I mean, think of how long it took us to figure out they were balls of gas, billions of miles away. Just an amazing thing. The whole understanding of the atom from the Greek all the way to now in subatomic physics. What a shift in the way we talk about things. things. You know, in the last 30 years, the whole concept in psychology of using computer and analogs, you know, we all have a cache, we all have a memory, we all, you know, and we use those to create new metaphors, new analogies. You see, there are new ways of seeing that are emerging, and that's where we're going next. What are some of these new ways of seeing? Lord knows we know what impedes them, and we've talked about that in today's, you know, from politics on. New ways of seeing. You know, we've been about that since the beginning here, and we're going to just be a little bit more intentional next time. My friend, may the peace and love of the oneness of being be all over you.